He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to be exploring a very long and very legendary cryptid called the Yamakachi. Now, before we get into that, some plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, and our email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. So, without further ado, let's explore this massive snake cryptid. Now, the Yamakachi is a massive snake that supposedly resides in Mount Surugasan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I looked into it. I'm pretty confident that is its pronunciation. This is located in Japan. So while the snake is legend itself, the local villagers have amassed quite a fear of this creature. Reportedly, when they are venturing out into this area at the base of this mountain, they'll even be bringing weapons with them to protect themselves when they venture up into the area. Now, we have giant snakes alive today like anacondas, and history shows we've had bigger ones like Titanoboa, which is of course an extinct type of snake and an ancestor to some of our larger present-day species of snakes. Titanoboa could grow up to 47 feet long, weigh anywhere between 16 to 2,500 pounds. Now, snakes in general are not everyone's cup of tea, and I really personally, I'm not trying to brag, I never really had much of a discomfort with them when I was little. Now, of course, spiders, that's another story. But when I was growing up, we had this deck that was attached to our house, and it was raised slightly off the ground, so you could kind of go underneath it. And for anything that was small like a snake, it was just a haven. It was great, and that's exactly what it attracted gardener snakes was just in the plethora quantity, just all amassing under there. It was like a hotel for gardener snakes. They absolutely loved it under there as a shelter. So they could come out during the daytime, soak in the sun, and then they could go back into the protection and the safety of the deck, having just be above their heads. Now, you'd have to be careful. When we were cutting the grass, we wanted to avoid hitting them as we knew that they enjoyed having their time out there. So the odd time, unfortunately, we would catch them sometimes in a lawnmower and be really, really sad. But the other times when we weren't busy cutting the grass as kids, me and my sister, we would actually successfully catch one or two of them and just kind of like lift them up, look at them, and then we would let them back out and let them do their own thing. So that kind of set a baseline of respect and understanding for me growing up with snakes. And so I'm definitely one of the individuals that feels relatively comfortable around them. I know that, again, like I said, it's not everyone's cup of tea. They can be very intimidating. They can be very, very freaky. So there's actually a word for this. This is a type of phobia. And now, in general, while it's not received by many, this fear is in fact called ophidiophobia. I tried pronouncing that many, many times for my wife, and I finally worked up the proper pronunciation for it. Now, coincidentally, this phobia is often attributed to the fear of all reptiles, which is called herpetophobia. But let's get back to this main cryptid at hand here. Now, the Yamakachi is said to reside on Mount Surugasan, which is the second highest mountain on the island of Shikoku. Now, this island itself is the smallest of four main islands of Japan. It's 300 kilometers long and around 50 kilometers at its widest point. There's a population of about 3.8 million, and it happens to be the least populated of the four Japanese islands. And as far as snakes go, the island has its fair share of species. There's 8 different ones, in fact. And one of these species, the Yamakachi, or tiger keelback, is basically a harmless snake. while it can grow to a fairly large size, it is often seen in or near water. The mamushi or pit viper is a very venomous snake. Short, chunky, but it resides everywhere, and if you do happen to get bit by one, it can cause hospitalization and take sometimes up to a month to recover from it. This snake will often flee, but it doesn't hold back a strike if it is feeling threatened, so you want to be very careful. Its bites are also strong enough to penetrate thick clothing, so make sure you are aware of that. And the other two main types I wanted to highlight here was the rat snake. While these ones don't have venom, they can still cause some discomfort with their large and sharp teeth should they be able to bite you. And then we also have the crow snake. This one is often more of a reclusive snake, but it's worth noting that all of these species are active between May and November. So those warmer months really tend to draw them out. Now, we know since human remains have been discovered on this island, dating back to around 300 BC, if we jump ahead to examine modern day settlers, many of their reports stem from seeing the occasional, or do I dare say, being attacked by a giant snake. And I quote, "On May 26, 1973, a few forestry workers came across a snake with the following description: a thick as a telephone pole with shiny black scales and a white underbelly. According to these workers, it was around 33 feet long. Some of the snakes were protruding from the thick underbrush. They were even emitting a loud chirping sound and cry before they would leave the area." End quote. The following month, and I quote, of the same year, June 1973, local officials responded to escalation fears by mounting a large-scale expedition to try and find giant snake or snakes. Volunteers scoured the mountainside in the vicinity of the sightings, looking for any evidence at all for what people had reported seeing. And they found no snake, but did discover what appeared to be a track left by the creature. End quote. So, this widespread panic is causing search parties and has just managed to draw in even more sightings, individuals coming forward claiming they've seen snakes between 26 and 36 feet long. For some context, a standard school bus on average is 45 feet long, so these snakes are immensely large in comparison. And this specific track that we were talking about here, this was found at around 16 inches across and trekked through fallen weeds and flattened brush. After it was extensively investigated, a select few just were immensely confident that this was the real deal without a doubt. And on top of this, we have a local museum that was making claim that they had actually found and were storing the snake in question's actual jawbone. And this jawbone was measuring in at 13 inches wide. This was looked at as being too good to be true, basically, and was met with heavy skepticism. Critics were coming in and started to examine this and point out, okay, this jawbone, it's not a snake, it's merely a shark's jaw, just been delicately rearranged to resemble that of a snake. But we still have the track here that is unexplained. Now, if this museum is to be taken seriously, or if not, it can be put off to the side as another piece of evidence. We have the tracks here that we can be looking at. So there is a reoccurring theme here that we're going to notice. And many of these local mountains are filled with similar reports of giant snakes. There's this mountain called Mount Tituwa falls into such a category, and I mention this mountain because physical evidence has actually been found here regarding the existence of giant snakes. There's a group of hikers on the mountain, and they stumbled upon a massive discarded skin from what they assumed was a shedding snake, and after the skin was taken and investigated properly, it was the hiker's suspicions that were confirmed that it was indeed from a snake, and this snake was estimated to have been at least 23 feet long. Now, we looked at a few different snake species that existed on the island and in this country, and for me personally, when I think about large snakes, my mind immediately takes me to anacondas. However, it's worth noting that anacondas don't reside in Japan. They're native to Colombia, Brazil, and Venezuela, just very South American locations, with homes in a few other places. And it's worth noting that the green anacondas are one of the largest snakes in the world, with females being considerably larger than the males, reaching lengths of 30 feet and a diameter of around 12 inches. But if we want to look more closely at Japan, there is a species that is considerably large and could make its way maybe over into this area. But geologically speaking, I don't see it happening, but I wanted to mention it nonetheless. Now, We have Japan falling under the region of Northeast Asia as opposed to Southeast Asia. Now, it's Southeast Asia that makes the home for the snake, basically. It's home based. The reticulated python. And this species of python is the world's longest snake and ranked third just behind the green anaconda for being the heaviest. Now, this python is also labeled as an excellent swimmer. And it's labeled this because it's been seen spotted way out in the ocean, and it's been seen swimming out to nearby islands, occupying them, which is why I wanted to mention this, because who knows, maybe this snake has made its way into some of these select few Japanese islands. We can't really dismiss the possibility of perhaps maybe these pythons make that trek. Now, both pythons and anacondas are a thought, and I emphasize on that word a lot here, that should they reside in an ideal environment, and I'm talking no interruptions, that they're going to be reaching sizes well beyond their current records. This is something that is scientifically, I'm not going to say fact, but scientifically believed and hypothesized that if it is that perfect environment in that situation, the most favorable conditions. But pythons and most types of boas are located commonly in those humid tropical environments, which is different from most of Japan's usual climate. They do have a low tolerance for extreme temperatures as well, and don't thrive in colder climates very well. Now, boas are a little bit different. They tend to have a lot more endurance and maybe perseverance on intense climates, whereas pythons not so much, which if we examine this mountain area here of Sursagan, of course you have warmer and humid summer months, but the winters can be quite potent. But perhaps this is only adding merit to the isolated and limited reports, because Japanese climate, in conclusion, it would be problematic enough that a snake of this previously mentioned type would not survive long enough to achieve that 25 to 30 feet. But when we have these seasons of cold spells coming in and extreme heat, this might kind of go into a intertwined kind of connection here with the next topic I'm going to be bringing up regarding just some of these snakes. I managed to find an interesting legend affiliated with Mount Suragasan with some paranormal attachments to it. Now, this legend, however, goes that a man-made pyramid was established here and a massive treasure belonging to King Solomon was hidden just beneath it. So this treasure was then bestowed upon with a colossal snake to guard it. I like legends like this. I think it's very fascinating and it's very cool, because who knows if there really is this massive temple that belongs to King Solomon there, and maybe at one point there were multiple snakes that were placed there to guard it, and the snakes just eventually just ceased to exist and died out. But, you know, in some legends, there might be some small, minuscule form of truth. It's very fascinating. But I digress. As we're nearing the back half of this episode, I wanted to just highlight a couple more encounters in Japan that I'm going to detail here, and I quote, January 24th, 1987. A 7-meter-long snake was seen spotted on a poultry farm. The farmer reported hearing a commotion coming from one of his chicken coops. When he went to investigate, what he found at first looked to be just a log inexplicably lying across the top of the coop. Closer inspection revealed that it was in fact a huge snake in the process of eating one of his chickens, and apparently it had already eaten plenty of others. The farmer's dog ended up chasing the snake off the property. Another experience included a giant white snake, reportedly 29.5 feet in length, and it had halted construction of a hotel when it appeared out from the nearby forest. Construction workers were actually frightened by this snake that they refused to return to work for several days. An inspection of the area turned up nothing. End quote. I reminded myself potentially of one last possibility here. Now, humans love exotic pets for whatever the reason being. Large snakes are no different from being under this category. So maybe en route, transport, or one residing in a nearby home escapes, and for the time being, in those warmer months, maybe it makes itself home in these nearby forests. If you have something from an out of country or a different area, part of the world, something that is not used to this kind of landscape, and you bring in this outside factor, it could either cease to exist right away, or it might thrive if it is brought into this new ecosystem and is easily stepping in as the dominant just the dominant component here in this part of nature, where it's thriving off of the food, it's on the top of the food chain itself, and it just has everything it needs. It could expedite that growth and expedite how well it's going to survive in this situation, in this area for a long time. Especially, let's say someone brings over a pet anaconda, it escapes, and it just thrives out here for the entirety of the summer, and then people start seeing things near the end of these warmer months, and maybe by that time this anaconda has grown and grown and grown and is just living its dream life. Now, people will see it this year, but then that winter comes along, the anaconda doesn't make it, and then what do you have left? Just a one season, a one-off of sightings, and then this thing becomes a cryptid legend. Now, I'm not saying that is factually true by any accounts. I don't have any probable evidence to support such a claim. It is purely a hypothetical situation that just made me think that people do like exotic animals. And when you bring in these creatures to different parts of the world, these things can happen. It can be unpredictable what the fallout of these situations can be. So it's just something that I just wanted to share. I found that the Japanese pet trade is actually quite popular. I don't know from experience, of course, but just when I was doing research into it, people were speaking very highly of it, of how popular of a trade it really is. And they do offer a wide variety of options regarding snakes. And so we can assume that not every snake enclosure is going to be 100%. So it's very plausible for something very sneaky to actually escape. And snakes are known for being excellent Houdinis at escaping. So if we're looking at exotically escaping snakes here, let's say the green anaconda or articulated python does escape, the length and size of the Yamakachi would be these other snakes' upper limit of what they are known to achieve, which already poses an interesting notion. But like we said before, it's greatly understood that these snakes could in theory reach massive sizes under those very ideal living situations like we mentioned. I found an old illustration that I'm going to post in the video version here on YouTube for you to see. It's a depiction of the snake, the Yamakachi, and it has an exceptionally larger depiction than how I first thought when I was trying to describe it earlier. Now, if you have seen Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, I would attribute this to the size of the basilisk in that film. And all that is that's pretty much everything I could dig up on this mysterious creature. It was really hard to find a lot of concrete and backstory on this aside from that legend and a few encounters. And from my personal standing, I just want to put out there, I don't doubt the possibility of maybe not a large group of these snakes, but maybe one or two of these massive things do thrive in this relatively untouched part of the world where humans venture in maybe only once in a while, but are mostly just fearful to go in. So you're going to have an area that is, for the most part, untouched by man. That's a huge boost for living in the ideal conditions, I would say. Or perhaps what used to be is no longer there. But the sightings did happen and the legend has remained. And I say this because of a lack of discussion on this cryptid and what appears to be a heavy amount of word of mouth regarding it. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. If you tuned in last week, we discussed how playing that game of telephone can sometimes change information. When you say it was a 30-foot long snake, after 50 years, maybe it's suddenly become a 35-foot snake, and so forth. But of course, we just don't know. I reckon the absolute best thing to do would be next time you're traveling in Japan, happen to be visiting nearby, ask locals about this legend and this cryptid, and you're going to hear some amazing things. There's a few episodes a while ago that I visited Harrison Hot Springs, and I did just that. I chatted with a few local individuals, visited the Sasquatch Museum they have there. The curator had been working on their own personal list of Bigfoot sightings on their own time, and these are sightings that were just submitted by people that she had met. And so getting to have a copy of that list, which was included in that episode, which it also featured their individuals' descriptions of their experiences, it was amazing. And so that's why just having that boots on the ground experience always trumps everything else. You can talk to people and really get to hear their stories and their perspectives. It's just rich in culture and history. So ultimately, was there a snake there? I think that there is highly a probable chance that there was something very large and something very, very snaky residing there. But as far as it being a Titanoboa, I don't think it was anything like that. The Yamakachi itself being a cryptid, I don't want to say and assume that it was a sense of mistaken identity because I just wasn't there and I don't know. But what I do know is that giant snakes do exist, and I think that there's a high chance that this is a giant snake that at one point did exist in that area. So on that note, we're going to close this one out. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. We're also on Patreon. And if you wish to reach out to us directly, you can do so at CryptidClues@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out our website, CryptidClues.ca. Until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.